What up with you folks? Today we are jumping in the saddle and drawing a concept motorcycle. Let's do it. Whenever I sit down to start a sketching session, I always like to warm up. Get your wrists moving, get your shoulders loose. Now as you can see here with this sketch, I did start by doing a couple of quick and dirty side view sketches to try to figure out a proportion and some shapes that I might like. And again, started off my base layer in a C1 Copic marker for both of the sketches you see on top, and then I've started here, I'm drawing that second sketch on the right hand side up top, but now I'm drawing in a 3/4 view. So I'm basically building myself an underlay using the C1 Copic marker. And just block out the wheels, your front and rear wheels, start to block out that swing arm, and now I'm laying space for, or laying down perspective lines for the top of the triple clamps and that rear top of the rear seat. So it's establishing my perspective a little bit with these guide lines or drawing lines. Kind of blocking in the shape here for a front headlight. I didn't really sketch that front headlight out in the side view, so I'm just kind of making it up on the fly. And just started to build detail slowly in this C1, and I'm starting with just the hard points, the functional points, right? The forks here. And starting to build out and start to work around what that front fairing or that front valence might be. And right here, it just kind of comes up tall. And so because it's not super slanted back or something like that, the general perception is going to be that this is not a high performance vehicle because it's got this really stood up grille. So I'm thinking this is probably going to be a lower speed urban adventure type of thing, electric. I will say that as I start to get into this sketch, if we're really going to kind of capture that adventure spirit, like what is an urban adventure? We don't know, this is a concept. We're starting to play with that idea. I'd probably want to give it a bit more ground clearance than what I'm starting to build here. Just because, think about this, if you're riding through the city and you want to jump up on a curb, not that you should, it's illegal, right? But let's say you need to go off-road in that way, you'd need some more suspension travel and some ground clearance so you're not bottoming out, all right, and damaging the bike really, or the curb or whatever you're hopping over. So here I'm looking at that sketch in the top right hand corner and trying to grab some of the key details and try to capture that proportion. And it's always a challenge drawing something, especially a motorcycle, in a front 3/4 view, because it's not like a car where everything's just this mono volume. Not that cars are all mono volumes, but it's all one mass for the most part. With a motorcycle, you've got a bunch of different masses. You've got the wheels, you've got the body, you've got the headlights, you've got the tank and the seat and the rear wheel, and they all need to sit in perspective and proper space in relation to each other, which can be a challenge. So, and then understanding how these parts work and interact with each other. So using this C1, I'm starting to figure that out. Right? I've given myself a guideline with that side view, which is super important for a motorcycle, because unlike in a car, in a motorcycle, you can see most of the bike in a side view. Right? You're not missing a whole lot. They're not super wide, and there isn't all kinds of crazy undulations along that front half, usually. So I'm starting with the side view, and then using that as my reference. It's my guide that I can look up at and check. Well, are my proportions right? So as I'm going through the sketch, I'm looking at, all right, well, where's the top of the wheel in relation to some of that center mass or whatever that, maybe it's the battery or in the motors in the middle of the bike there. right? Or is the wheel taller than that? Is it lower? So just thinking about those relationships, and that's helping to guide me as I'm drawing this bike in 3/4. And again, thinking about that adventure look of giving this a kind of a dirt bike front fender, kind of hanging off right underneath the light. And once I've gone through the process of creating an undersketch with that C1, you can do it in a Bic. That was the previous sketch I used, a Bic, to go back over the sketch to really start to punch out some of those key details and create your line work. But this time, giving yourself an underlay. In this instance, I'm using a Uniball gel pen. We talked in the last video a little bit around Bics bleed once you go over them with marker, which is what I intend to do here. So this Uniball pen, the ink is waterproof and it dries really quick, which is nice. So what that means is that I can finish this sketch or this overlay, and I don't have to wait for the ink to dry, and then I can put marker over this and it's not going to smear and make a mess all over your paper like it does when you use a Bic. Again, if you're using a Bic with marker, you can call it kind of, it's a looser look that it will give you. This here is going to be a bit tighter, right? Because the markers aren't going to bleed. So I'm trying to be precise with the line work that I make with this pen, because it's not like a Bic. You don't get to build up your sketch marks. If you put a mark with this kind of a pen, you've got to commit to it. And there are a couple areas here where I hesitate for a bit. You'll see a couple of them where the lines are a little bit hairy, they call it, or they're a little sketchy. And so then I had to really just kind of ground myself and say, all right, one stroke, one mark, or one motion, one mark. Right, trying to create some thickness there for that part, that underbody part, that fender that's wrapping around the ostensibly what would be the battery. Creating this kind of body line, this crease. It's almost like a pinch on that body, that if that was the sound that a form would make, it just kind of pulling out. And when I've got that fender wrapping underneath that, what would be the battery, creating a little bit of thickness, and then some detail there. Maybe there's a cooling vent or some kind of intake, air intake that might be needed. Again, there's all kinds of electronics on an electric motorcycle, so maybe you'll need some extra air pulling through there. Who knows? If anything, it's adding some visual interest. And then again, starting to really flesh out that battery pack, and there's some more cooling vent. I do think the general shape of that battery pack is not exactly true to what I see in the side view, so I'd probably rework that a bit. It's also is feeling a little bit close to the front wheel. Close enough where it actually might not fit in the real world, like they might actually be touching. So if I were to do another overlay of this, I'd probably give that front fork a little bit more rake, or pull the front wheel out a little bit, give that some more space between, give the front wheel some more space between that battery section and the body section. But that's why we sketch, right? We sketch so that we can work through these things and find the proportions that work best. It's part of the process. And it's never ending. And then I'm coming through, starting to add some brake light detail, some swing arm detail. And then I'm thinking that this is a pass-through, right? So the body won't be entirely enclosed. So if you can pass through, you might see some details like some suspension mounting or some framework or something like that. So starting to hint at there being something hidden under there. Maybe it's storage, who knows? Could be anything. I guess that's for us to decide. right? That's why we put pen to paper so we can work through those sorts of things. All right, and then thinking about maybe some cut lines, or how is this thing going to be assembled? Right now I've got like that tank section and that lower fairing, then the seat. So there's at least three, maybe four clear parts there. Because in theory, it might be difficult to mold all of those details into a single part. It might get stuck in the tool. So it's something to consider. Well, how might you actually put this thing together? It's part of the role of the designer. Or is really considering how are things actually made? Is there a creative way that we can make this thing? Coming through, kind of finishing out and rounding out the sketch with those rear wheels. And you've got to have some kind of connection to your drivetrain, right? Or something connecting your power plant to your rear wheel. So that hence the chain that I just drew in there, but you could also have a shaft drive or a belt drive, whatever you want. Maybe there's some other kind of fun drive that you can find. All right, so now that the pen section is done, I'll go grab my markers and we'll start to add some value to our pen work, to our line work. And that will start to hide a lot of that under sketching and searching that we were doing with the C1. And come in here with a C2 pen. So I usually will use a Cool Gray 2, a Cool Gray 4, and a Cool Gray 6. Sometimes I'll go to Cool Gray 8 if you really want to punch out some more of those darks, but you can communicate most of what you need to with just 3 colors, or 3 values really. So here I am with the C2, blocking in those side surfaces, some of the front surfaces. Right, we often want to think about things but one, we want to identify what's going to be the lightest, right? And then leave that part of the sketch white. Right, so we've got to do a little bit of pre-visualization there. So think about your highlights or maybe your top surfaces if this is a more traditional lighting scenario. Because with paper, you can't erase the pen. Right? I suppose you could paint over it with some gouache or something like that, but it's an extra step that we can, in most cases, avoid. But not in all. Right, then I come back here with the C4, and our cylinders have that core that runs down the side depending on where the light is. And it's a little bit shinier of a material, so I'll leave a darker core next to a brighter white that starts to, or a brighter value, so it starts to show more of that shine, versus a matte material that might not have that close of a contrast next to each other. Meaning it will be a softer blend versus a white to a C4, which is a very high contrast area. Right, and then coming in here with again with the C4 and blocking in some of those lower surfaces that are facing away from the light, at least more so than the others, so that we start to get that delineation of form. Right, we're really thinking about where the light falls on a surface. Right, then I'll start to block in that ground shadow to make this sketch feel like it's planted on the ground, like it's really sitting on a surface. And so I feel like a ground shadow is a nice way to do that. Makes it feel a bit more real. Not an Instagram reel, it's an R-E-A-L. Obviously, right? And now, coming in, I was feeling like that side surface was maybe just there wasn't enough interest, so thinking about that pinch, you're gonna have a little bit of an undersurface there, so blocking that in. And now I come in with the C6 and really start to punch out some more of those details, right? And I'm punching out the details that are closer to the front end of the sketch. And then as I move towards the back of the sketch, you'll see me use less and less of the C6. I think the rear wheel won't get any of the C6 treatment because we want to create a vignette. I want it to be a bit more punchy, a bit bolder towards the front of the sketch, so it gives it this sense of atmosphere. And if you look out over a mountain range, the mountains closer to you will be more contrast or like darker. And then as you look out farther, the mountains get lighter. We're trying to create a little bit of that effect here, even though we're not looking at a mountain range, but the effect creates a dynamic look. And we achieve that by having darker colors up front, closer to us, a higher contrast, and then as we move towards the rear, less contrast, where we're using values that aren't quite as dark. And that's about it for the moment. I'll continue to just punch out a couple little details, but that is a concept electric adventure city bike. Maybe we'll keep on working on this thing, and I think it has some potential. I hope you found some value. If you need any supplies, click the links in the description and leave a comment. Love to hear what you think. Talk to you soon.